October 1929. Stock market crashes. Banks collapse. 25 million Americans lose their jobs. Families live in cardboard boxers. Bread lines stretch 4 blocks. Suicides skyrocket by 30%. This was the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in American history. But while millions starved, a small group of men became fabulously wealthy. They didn't just survive the Depression, they thrived in it. They used the chaos to build empires that would last generations. By 1935, while the average American was struggling to afford bread, these men had multiplied their fortunes by 10, even 20 times. Their names: Joseph Kennedy, J. Paul Getty, Thomas Watson, Howard Hughes, John D. Rockefeller Jr. Some of them are remembered as heroes, others as villains, but all of them understood one brutal truth. The greatest fortunes are made when everyone else is losing theirs. This is the story of how they did it, the strategies they used, the moral lines they crossed, and why their playbook is being used right now by today's billionaires. Joseph Patrick Kennedy was a Boston Irishman who clawed his way into Wall Street's Protestant elite. By 1929, he was worth $4 million, about $70 million today. But that was nothing compared to what he would make from the crash. Kennedy had a gift. He understood human psychology better than any economist. In the summer of 1929, while everyone else was buying stocks, Kennedy noticed something. The market had become a religion. Shoeshiners were giving stock tips. Secretaries were taking out loans to buy shares. When Kennedy's shoeshiner started recommending stocks, he knew the end was near. In September 1929, Kennedy did the unthinkable. He sold everything, every single stock. His friends called him crazy. The market was at all-time highs. Why sell now? Kennedy's response was simple. Only a fool holds out for top dollar. But Kennedy didn't just sell. He went short. He borrowed stocks and sold them, betting they would fall. When the crash came in October, Kennedy was positioned perfectly. While others lost fortunes, he made millions. In 1 month, he doubled his net worth. But the real genius came after the crash. Kennedy understood something fundamental. In a depression, cash is king. When everyone is desperate, assets become ridiculously cheap. Kennedy spent the early 1930s buying entire companies for pennies on the dollar. Real estate at 90% discounts. Hollywood studios on the verge of bankruptcy. Kennedy bought a controlling stake in Film Booking Offices of America for practically nothing. He merged it with other struggling studios. By 1936, he sold his Hollywood interests for $5 million, a 500% return. He bought office buildings in New York for a fraction of their construction costs. When the market recovered, they were worth fortunes. But Kennedy's most controversial move was stock manipulation. In the early 1930s, regulations were weak. Kennedy ran pump and dump schemes. He'd buy a stock, spread rumors it was going to explode, watch amateurs pile in, then sell at the peak. It was legal then. Today, it would send you to prison. By 1935, Joseph Kennedy was worth over $180 million in today's dollars. From $70 million to $180 million. During the worst economic collapse in history, his son would become president. His family would become American royalty, all built on Depression-era profits. When Franklin Roosevelt appointed Kennedy to head the new Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934, the irony was perfect. A man who had manipulated markets was now in charge of stopping market manipulation. Roosevelt's logic: set a thief to catch a thief. John Paul Getty was already wealthy when the Depression hit. His father had built a successful oil business. But Getty had bigger ambitions. He wanted to be the richest man in the world. The Depression gave him his chance. Getty's strategy was simple and ruthless. When oil prices collapsed in 1930, small oil companies went bankrupt by the hundreds. They couldn't service their debts. They couldn't afford to operate. They were desperate to sell. Getty bought them all. He focused on one thing: not oil wells, but oil reserves. The oil was still in the ground. It hadn't lost value. Only the stock prices had collapsed. Getty understood that oil would be valuable again eventually. He just had to wait. And he had the cash to wait as long as necessary. In 1930, Getty bought his first major acquisition: Pacific Western Oil Company. The price, $500,000 for a company that had been valued at $10 million just a year earlier. The owners were desperate. They took his offer. Getty now controlled oil reserves worth tens of millions. But Getty went further. He played family against family. His mother and father were both wealthy. Getty borrowed money from both of them, playing one against the other. He convinced his mother that his father was making bad investments. He told his father that his mother didn't understand business. Both gave him money. Getty used it to buy more oil companies. Throughout the 1930s, Getty acquired company after company. Tidewater Associated Oil Company, Mission Corporation, Skelly Oil. Each purchase was made at Depression prices. Each gave him more oil reserves, more refineries, more distribution networks. By 1936, Getty controlled an oil empire, and he'd built it for a fraction of what it would have cost in normal times. Getty's personal life was cold as his business dealings. He was notoriously cheap. He installed a payphone in his mansion so guests couldn't make free calls. He contested his father's will to cut out family members. He married 5 times, each marriage ending in divorce. His son would later write that Getty loved oil more than his own children. But by 1957, Fortune magazine named J. Paul Getty the richest living American. His net worth over $1 billion in $1,957. That's $11 billion today. Almost all of it traced back to Depression-era acquisitions. Companies bought for nothing. Oil reserves purchased at historic lows. An empire built on others' desperation. Getty's justification. In times of crisis, the strong survive and the weak perish. I was simply stronger. But was it strength or ruthlessness? The line between them was blurry. Thomas Watson was different from Kennedy and Getty. He wasn't buying companies or manipulating stocks. He was building something, and the Depression gave him the perfect opportunity. Watson was the president of IBM, then called International Business Machines. In 1929, IBM made tabulating machines, mechanical devices that sorted data using punch cards. When the Depression hit, Watson did something that seemed insane. While every other company was firing workers and cutting costs, Watson hired aggressively. Between 1929 and 1935, IBM's workforce grew from 5,000 to 8,000 employees. At a time when unemployment reached 25%, Watson was creating jobs. Why? Watson saw the future. He understood that the Depression would end eventually. When it did, businesses would need to rebuild. They would need modern equipment. They would need data processing. IBM would be ready, but there was more to it. Watson cultivated relationships with the one entity that wasn't going broke, the government. In 1935, Congress passed the Social Security Act. Suddenly, the government needed to track employment records for 26 million Americans. Manually, it would be impossible. The government needed IBM's machines. Watson had been preparing for this moment. IBM won the contract. It was worth millions. As the government expanded to fight the Depression, IBM's machines became essential. Watson also exploited the Depression's labor market. Talented engineers were desperate for work. Watson hired them at bargain wages. Brilliant minds that would normally cost fortunes were available for nothing. These engineers developed new technologies, better tabulating machines, more efficient designs. By the time the Depression ended, IBM had a technological lead over its competitors. Watson also bought patents. Small companies with valuable inventions were going bankrupt. Watson swooped in. He bought their patents for pennies. By 1940, IBM controlled most of the key patents in data processing. Any competitor would have to pay IBM licensing fees. Watson had created a monopoly. The most controversial part of Watson's empire, IBM's German subsidiary. During the 1930s, IBM's German division sold punch card systems to the Nazi government. These systems were used to organize the Holocaust, to track Jewish populations, to manage concentration camps. IBM's machines made the final solution possible. After the war, IBM claimed they had no control over the German subsidiary, that it had been taken over by the Nazis. But evidence suggests IBM headquarters knew exactly what was happening and continued to profit from it. Watson himself visited Germany in 1937 and received a medal from Hitler. By 1945, Thomas Watson's personal fortune was estimated at $100 million, over $1.6 billion today. IBM had become one of the world's most valuable companies, and it started by exploiting the Great Depression's cheap labor and government contracts. Howard Hughes inherited his fortune. His father invented a revolutionary oil drill bit and died in 1924, leaving Howard $750,000 in ownership of Hughes Tool Company. Howard was only 18. Most people expected him to squander the inheritance. Instead, Hughes turned it into billions. When the Depression hit, Hughes was in Hollywood making movies. His film Hell's Angels cost $4 million, an astronomical sum. It nearly bankrupted him. But the Depression saved Hughes in an unexpected way. Aviation. The Depression devastated the airline industry. Passenger numbers collapsed. Airlines went bankrupt. Aircraft manufacturers couldn't sell planes. But Hughes saw opportunity. He'd always been obsessed with aviation. Now he could buy his way in for nothing. In 1932, Hughes founded Hughes Aircraft Company. He bought factories for a fraction of their value. He hired unemployed engineers at Depression wages. Brilliant aeronautical minds who had been laid off by Boeing and Douglas were grateful for any job. Hughes paid them terribly but gave them freedom to innovate. Hughes himself was a skilled pilot. He test flew every plane personally. He broke speed records. In 1935, he flew a plane he designed to a world record 352 miles per hour. In 1938, he flew around the world in 91 hours. The publicity was invaluable. Hughes became a national hero. But Hughes's real genius was government contracts. When World War II began, the military needed planes desperately. Hughes Aircraft was ready. The company won massive contracts. Fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes. Money poured in. Hughes Aircraft went from a Depression-era startup to a defense industry giant. Hughes also bought airlines. In 1939, he purchased 78% of Transcontinental and Western Air, later known as TWA. The price $7 million for an airline that would be worth hundreds of millions. Hughes had bought at the absolute bottom. The Depression had created the sale of the century. But Hughes's personal demons grew worse. His obsessive-compulsive disorder intensified. He became paranoid, reclusive. By the 1950s, he was living in darkened hotel rooms, refusing to see anyone. He grew his fingernails long, stopped bathing, became addicted to painkillers. The man who had built an empire was slowly going insane. Yet his business empire continued to grow. By the 1960s, Hughes was worth over $1.5 billion. His holdings included airlines, aircraft, manufacturing, casinos, and hotels. He was one of the richest men in the world, and the foundation was laid during the Depression. Buying assets for nothing and hiring genius for pennies, Hughes died in 1976, a reclusive madman, but his fortune lived on. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute became one of the world's largest charitable organizations. Depression era, profits funding modern medical research. The irony was complete. John D. Rockefeller Jr. didn't make his fortune during the Depression. His father, the original oil baron, had already done that. But Jr. used the Depression to solidify the Rockefeller dynasty for generations, and he did it through real estate. When the stock market crashed, real estate collapsed even harder. In New York, property values fell 80%. Developers went bankrupt. Construction projects were abandoned half-finished. The city was full of empty lots and unfinished buildings. Rockefeller saw his opportunity. In 1930, Rockefeller began the most ambitious construction project in American history. Rockefeller Center, 14 buildings in the heart of Manhattan. The timing seemed insane. Building a massive complex during the Depression, but Rockefeller understood the math. Construction costs had collapsed. Labor was desperate and cheap. Skilled workers were begging for jobs. Materials were being sold at a loss. Everything Rockefeller needed to build was at historic lows. If he waited for the economy to recover, costs would triple. So Rockefeller built during the Depression. The project employed 40,000 workers over 9 years. To those workers, Rockefeller was a hero. He gave them jobs when no one else would. He kept families from starving. He was praised as a humanitarian. But the economics told a different story. Rockefeller paid Depression wages. Workers desperate to feed their families accepted whatever he offered. If it had been built in the 1920s, the same project would have cost twice as much. Rockefeller saved hundreds of millions by building when labor was desperate. Was this generosity or exploitation? Both could be true. Rockefeller also bought distressed properties across Manhattan, office buildings selling for 20 cents on the dollar, apartment complexes being liquidated by bankrupt banks. He accumulated one of the largest real estate portfolios in New York. When property values recovered in the 1940s, the Rockefeller fortune multiplied. But Rockefeller's public image was carefully cultivated. He donated to charities, built public parks, funded medical research. The Rockefeller Foundation gave away millions. It was brilliant public relations. The family that had made fortunes from Standard Oil's monopoly was now seen as benevolent philanthropists. The reality was more complex. Yes, Rockefeller gave away massive sums, but he also profited immensely from others' suffering. He bought when sellers were desperate. He built when workers had no choice but to accept low wages. He turned the Depression into dynastic wealth that still exists today. By 1940, the Rockefeller family was worth over $1.4 billion, about $30 billion today. 6 generations later, the family is still wealthy, still influential, and that traces back to Depression era. Real estate bought at fire sale prices. What did these 5 men have in common? How did they profit from a catastrophe that destroyed millions of lives? The playbook had several key elements. First, they had cash before the crisis. When everyone else was fully invested in stocks, they had already sold. When everyone else needed money, they had it to deploy. Cash is king in a crisis. Second, they bought assets, not stocks. Getty bought oil reserves. Hughes bought factories and airlines. Rockefeller bought real estate. Kennedy bought entire companies. They didn't speculate on paper. They bought things with intrinsic value at massive discounts. Third, they had patience. They didn't expect quick returns. Getty sat on oil reserves for years. Rockefeller built for a decade. They could afford to wait because they weren't desperate. Desperation is what makes you sell low. Patience is what lets you buy low. Fourth, they exploited cheap labor. Watson hired engineers at bargain wages. Hughes paid Depression salaries. Rockefeller paid construction workers a fraction of normal rates. Desperate workers accepted anything. These men took advantage. Fifth, they had no sentimentality. Kennedy manipulated markets while people starved. Getty foreclosed on competitors. Hughes bought bankrupt competitors. Rockefeller built his empire on cheap labor. None of them let sympathy interfere with profit. Sixth, they bet on recovery. They all believed the Depression would end, that economies eventually recover, that assets bought cheap today would be worth fortunes tomorrow. They were right, but what if they'd been wrong? Were these men heroes or villains? The answer depends on who you ask. To their defenders, they were visionaries. They created jobs when no one else would. Watson employed thousands. Rockefeller's construction projects kept 40,000 families fed. Hughes built factories. Without them, even more people would have suffered. They also built things of lasting value. IBM's technology revolutionized business. Rockefeller Center became an iconic landmark. Hughes aircraft advanced aviation. Getty's oil fueled America's growth. Their Depression-era investments created value that lasted decades. But the critics see something darker. These men profited from others' desperation. They paid starvation wages because workers had no choice. They bought companies from people who had lost everything. They accumulated wealth while millions went hungry. Kennedy manipulated markets. Watson's machines enabled the Holocaust. Getty destroyed competitors. Hughes exploited bankruptcy. Rockefeller built on cheap labor. Each crossed moral lines. The most troubling question is this: did they help end the Depression or prolong it? By hoarding cash and buying assets cheap? Did they drain liquidity from the economy? Did their profit-seeking make things worse for everyone else? Economists still debate this. Some argue that by buying and building, they put money back into circulation. Others argue that they extracted wealth from a suffering system. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Here's what should frighten you. The Depression playbook is still being used today. During the 2008 financial crisis, billionaires bought assets at fire sale prices. Warren Buffett bought stocks when everyone else was selling. Private equity firms bought distressed companies for nothing. Real estate investors accumulated properties from foreclosures. In 2020, during the COVID pandemic, billionaire wealth increased by $1.8 trillion while millions lost their jobs. Jeff Bezos' wealth grew $90 billion. Elon Musk added $150 billion. How the stock market crashed in March 2020? They bought when it recovered? They were richer than ever? The pattern is always the same. Crisis creates opportunity. Assets become cheap. Labor becomes desperate. Those with cash can buy. Those without cash must sell. Wealth transfers from the many to the few. After every crisis, wealth inequality increases. After the Depression, the top 1% owned more than ever. After 2008, the same thing happened. After COVID, wealth concentration reached historic highs. Today, we might be on the brink of the next crisis. Stock market valuations are at record highs. Corporate debt is at historic levels. Consumer debt exceeds $17 trillion. Housing is less affordable than ever. When this bubble bursts, who will profit? With the same type of people who profited from the Depression, those with cash waiting to deploy, those willing to buy when others must sell, those without sentimentality. Who are today's Depression profiteers waiting in the wings? Warren Buffett sits on $150 billion in cash waiting for the next crash. Bill Ackman and other hedge fund managers maintain massive dry powder funds. Private equity firms have raised $2.5 trillion waiting to be deployed. They're not hoping for a crash, but they're prepared for one. When it comes, they'll buy. Distressed companies, foreclosed properties, bankrupt competitors, they'll employ the same playbook as Kennedy and Getty, and they'll become even richer. But there's a darker trend today. Technology allows wealth extraction at scales impossible in the 1930s. Algorithmic trading can crash markets in milliseconds. Hedge funds can short entire economies. Private equity can buy companies, strip their assets, and leave them to die. The 1930s billionaires, at least, built things. Watson built IBM. Rockefeller built Rockefeller Center. Hughes built factories. Today's vulture funds often just extract, buy a company, load it with debt, pay themselves dividends, let it go bankrupt. Workers lose jobs, creditors lose money, but the fund made its profit. If you're an ordinary person, what can you learn from the Depression billionaires? First, cash is king in a crisis. Having savings gives you options, lets you buy when others must sell, lets you wait out bad times. Debt is the opposite. It forces you to sell at the worst possible time. Second, assets matter more than paper wealth. Getty bought oil reserves. Rockefeller bought buildings. Physical assets have intrinsic value. Stock portfolios can vanish overnight. A house, a business, a skill, these have value in any economy. Third, prepare before the crisis. Kennedy sold in September 1929. The crash came in October. If you wait until the crisis hits, you're too late. The time to prepare is when times are good. Fourth, recovery always comes eventually. Every depression ends. Every recession ends. But the timing is unpredictable. You need enough reserves to survive until recovery comes. But here's the brutal truth. Most people can't follow this playbook. You need capital to start with. Kennedy began with $4 million. Getty had his father's oil business. You probably don't have millions to deploy when prices crash. The system is designed to transfer wealth upward during crises. Those with capital buy from those without. Always has been. Probably always will be. The greatest irony of the Depression, profiteers. Many of their families are still wealthy today. The Kennedy family, the Rockefeller dynasty, the Hughes estate, the Getty Trust, the Watson family. Wealth built on Depression-era suffering has been passed down through generations. Meanwhile, the families that lost everything in the Depression often never recovered. Generational poverty replaced generational wealth. The trauma lasted decades. Some families still haven't climbed back. The Depression didn't just redistribute wealth for one generation. It reset family trajectories for a century. This is why crisis profiteering matters. It's not just about who wins today. It's about who wins for the next 100 years. When Kennedy bought companies for pennies in 1932, he wasn't just making himself rich. He was establishing a dynasty. When working families lost their savings, they weren't just losing money. They were losing their children's future, their grandchildren's opportunities.